because we came up with the idea that we needed to find new and innovative ways to connect readers and writers. And we thought, great Western Australian writers, what can we put them with that's also great in Western Australia? And it wasn't too hard to actually think great Western Australian wines. So, and that's what we're all about at writingWA. We're the advocacy, we're the peak body that supports libraries and writing groups, but we're also about supporting writers, established and well-known writers and emerging writers, and we're about supporting publishers and illustrators. And when the state government does crazy things like thinking it's going to close down libraries, we jump up and make a noise and make sure that they don't. But we're delighted to be here today. We started a glass of wine and a good book, very small, about 2 years ago. And I have to say, we're thrilled to be here at Cullen's today with Jane and the team, and our thanks to Vanya for being involved when she gets back. And also with Margaret Press, because I just think this is just fantastic. And our 3 emerging authors who we're going to meet. So on behalf of writingWA, as someone who is supporting this venture, it's the first in a series of 3 that Caroline and Jane will talk about. We're just thrilled to be here, and I urge you all to keep reading Western Australian writers because you're being bombarded with opportunities, but Western Australia has always punched above its weight with the quality of writers that we've produced in this state, and there are still great and new writers that you can always find. You can go to our website if you're not sure who the new and emerging ones are, but you're going to meet some terrific ones today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Caroline, I'm going to hand over to Jane, and thank you for the splendid wine. writingWA. A quick thank you to everyone. Welcome to Cullen Wines on behalf of the whole Cullen family. Hopefully this is the start of a great thing. Like everything here at Cullen, everything's always growing and changing, and we love to welcome new things like this. And we look forward to working with Caroline and everyone else. So please enjoy the beautiful wine and the beautiful location and the great stories. Thank you. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Caroline, for those of you who haven't met me. I run Margaret Publishing with my husband John, and I'd like to welcome all of you to the first of 3 Sunday sessions we're going to be having with Cullen. The partnership with Cullen actually is very exciting because it's something that I've been chatting to Vanya about for a little while, and she's been absolutely fantastic and very enthusiastic. So we've got the 3 Sunday readings happening, a good book and a glass of wine, on the first Sunday for the next 3 months. And we've also got another project happening with Cullen, which I'm absolutely excited about, and I think it's really brilliant. We've chosen 10 wines from Cullen, and we've chosen 10 poets to write a poem for each wine. And we're going to produce a Cullen poetry book, which I'm hoping will be an annual event, and also the story of Cullen. And the publication should come out sometime next year. But on the 23rd of November, we're going to give people a little taste of not only the wine, but the poems. And we've got, as part of the Gourmet Escape, we've got a Cullen dinner happening, poetry dinner, poetry and song. Vanya grows everything. We start with poetry, and now we've got song as well. So we're having that on the 23rd of November. Details are on the website. So to today's event, what you've got is the Knitting and Other Stories, which is a collection from the 2013 short story writing competition. This is an annual competition we run with Arts Margaret River, and this year was the 2nd year that we've run it. We had 256 entries from all over Australia, which is fantastic, and we've got stories in the collection from writers from right around Australia. But today I'm delighted to be able to introduce 3 emerging writers, and I think you should look out for their names in the future. We've got Vahri McKenzie, who is the winner of the Southwest Prize of the competition. Vahri lectures in the Bachelor of Arts program at ECU in the Southwest and lives in Boston. We have Alyssa Davis, who is a video nerd. She says video game nerd with an unhealthy love of fantasy, science fiction, and children's card games. And we've got Kristen Levitzke, who's a Perth-based teacher and writer of fiction. So they're going to read, give you a little taste of their stories in the book. Vahri will go first, and then we'll have Alyssa and then Kristen. And the other person I'd like to introduce you to today is the person sitting on my left, who's Richard. Richard is one of the judges of the competition and the editor of the collection. He's done that 2 years running. So he does an absolutely fantastic job, all for love as well. And our books, of course, are for sale. So, you know, just enjoy the afternoon. So we'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Caroline. So I'm going to read from my story, I Shine, Not Burn, and I was asked to give a cliffhanger effect, so it will stop partway through, and you can buy the book and read the end. Recently, my grandparents died, and I inherited the family blazon of arms. The object itself is modest, a wooden shield with an enamelled copper design and a certificate of authenticity on the back. The shield is azure, a deer's head cabossed, the crest, a mountain inflamed, proper. But the curiosity is this. Digging the artifact out of the accumulated tokens of 2 lifetimes drew to my attention the fact that I'd mislearnt the family motto. We, my immediate family and I, had always said, I burn, not shine, and not without some pride. This burning was a mark of seriousness. To burn was to transform, to heat and heat and heat. It was the engine that created the energy of social change, so we said. But the truth is that we shine, not burn. Lucio non uro. It was the end of an era. The family elders had died within a year of each other. Their home had been packed up and sold. And now it seemed we had to find a way to recuperate by a new hearth, by the warmth of some other inflamed mountains. For me, too, there was shift afoot. A good job was taking me to a new city and ending my long-term relationship. Or perhaps the ending of the relationship was delivering me to a new job. Who can tell? At any rate, I was getting the gamut of that list of most stressful events psychologists on the radio talk about. I was between places. Had found a lovely place in the southwest, but still had unfinished business in Perth. There was my grandmother's funeral. She died at 93, and the size of the number took the sting out of the passing. Of the very long-lived, we tend to say, it was a good long life, as if endurance itself is proof enough of the quality of the experience. But it seems to me that the longer something lasts, the more ambivalent I feel, the less certain and more distant I am from first impressions. She was of that generation of women who made no secret of living for the men in their lives. I found that deeply troubling. I know there were exceptions, but did it have to be the rule? Wasn't she troubled too? No. Allegiance to her father, then her husband, was beyond question. Other alliances were shifting. When I was younger, she'd take me aside and inquire conspiratorially about some significant treasure she'd given months, years earlier. If I couldn't reassure her of its ongoing place in my affections, I was dismissed. Once, new to the game, I told her sincerely that Mum and Dad had sold the glass bead necklace at a jumble sale. Parents are monsters, aren't they? She declared. Her life was marked by a founding tragedy, the loss of her own mother at 10 years of age. As the oldest girl child, she became surrogate mother to her 7 younger siblings. She took pride in this, wrote and self-published her self-taught story, insisted she missed out on nothing. It was clear to all of us, however, that part of her had never grown up. The barely disguised fire of her anger manifested itself in family life with attempts to control the minutiae of our lives. Another important thing about my grandmother was that she was a communist. After that term ceased to be relevant, when there was no longer a party to belong to, she was just your run-of-the-mill raging lefty. Not only did she bequeath to the family an unshakable sense of the importance of social justice, She modelled a combative approach forged in years of union work. Does this contradict what I said earlier about living for the men in her life? Ah, well, that's the thing. Her husband took the position, but she was the engine who drove him. She liked to crochet when people came to visit. How to eulogise such a dissembler? One year she was the state Scrabble champion. She had a way with words. Often they were used to bite, harmlessly at public figures on TV, but sometimes at unfortunate family members or professionals appointed to assist the elderly couples. My grandfather suffered from dementia in the last decade of his life, though he remained physically strong. Grandma, on the other hand, grew slight and wispy, but kept a sharp eye on the world and in all its wickedness. Nothing escaped her attention. After my grandfather started to fade, Grandma collected information on WAVES, the euthanasia advocacy organisation, as if she couldn't imagine herself without him. In the end, she fell and crushed a vertebra. Hospitalised, it was decided that her bones were too soft to withstand surgery, and she succumbed to iatrogenic disease and died. It took a few weeks. Her wishes were clear enough, though dying remains a tough business. When the doctor leaned close to hear what she was saying, she taunted him. "You haven't the courage, have you? Go on, do it, knock me on the head." How can I make sense of such a life? When the time came to burn her body and offer a ceremonial space to family and friends to pay their final respects, my uncle offered a rather dry historical précis of her life and times. It had none of the passion for period colour that featured in his oration for my grandfather the year before. This was the harder relationship to him. The space between dying and burning simply wasn't large enough to distill 70 years of complex interactions into heartfelt and public speech. My father spoke bluntly of what she was like as a mother, petty and impersonal, and forgave her by drawing a line straight from her childhood to his. But the circumstances of her childhood he could not so easily forgive. A child can't be robbed like that and it not have generational effects. "It's just the way things were," she'd always said. My great-grandfather, I remember him as a large, loud presence, tried to make it up to my grandmother. She was to be his offsider, attend meetings with him and read the same literature. She was a 12-year-old Nadja Krupskaya-Lenin. In losing his wife, my great-grandfather had a tragedy of his own. But sacrificing her childhood wasn't the only option. My grandmother wasn't given a choice. "I forgive you, Mum," my dad said, "but I don't forgive the selfish old bastard who did it to you." In the chapel, we collectively drew breath. My mother spoke next. Her reminiscences were lighter, and I felt relieved. And yet they were stories that illuminated my grandmother's contradictions, which was what made her interesting and infuriating. It was during my mother's eulogy that Cousin Peter started to call out. Quietly at first, just a muttering in the front row that my uncle shushed, but then she started to speak up. It was a bit like those times my grandmother would stage whisper in the cinema when she'd figured out the twist in the movie before anyone else. "That's not right," Peter called, softly at first, and then, "It isn't right. Sit down, Margaret." "I'm sorry, Peter, but you weren't there," Mum said. She continued, but the room was at breaking point. You could hear how wide our eyes were. I think Mum had rehearsed her rebuttal along with her speech. Had they discussed it, she and Dad, prepared for objections? This was the funeral of a matriarch of a family that said so much and still said so little. That moment was like my grandmother's spirit had jumped out of the casket that held the body and, looking for a willing creature to inhabit, settled into the aura of Cousin Peter. Front row, but not immediate family. A lonely woman who spent a lot of time with my grandmother in the last months of her life. Death couldn't contain that indomitable spirit, and now here was a chance to enliven once more, or to perhaps burn anew any who came too close. "Sit down," Peter called again, standing up. "It's disrespectful, it's not right." And she left the chapel, moving noisily down the aisle. I didn't look around, and then I got up to speak.
My name is Alyssa, and I'm reading from Kissing Tracks.
Are you all right with them sitting down, or?
Yeah.
The trainman always ends up at the tracks, no matter what he does. It's 5 in the morning when the coppers throw him to the floor and grind his face against pavement and piss. His breath comes out in foggy huffs that smell like old alcohol and smoke, and when he breathes, it's a harsh, sucking wheeze. The copper on top of him has his knee jammed into his spine, with his hands clamped around his arms, pulled together like chicken wings. The trainman feels like a chicken, right enough, like he's been strung up on the grill, but that's a far-off thought, and it's mute against the haze that makes him dizzy, his whole body hum. Off to the side, the copper's body helps the cuffs on, and to, like clockwork, flip the trainman around. There's a light shone in his eyes, and behind that constant buzzing of his nerves, trainman hears the copper ask for his name. Words dribble from the trainman's mouth, all garbled, drowned in the memory of cheap grog, and probably not in the right order. He knows he's swearing to, because his tongue is flapping and spit is flying, and the copper is looking at him in that way again. But the trainman can't help it. He had a name once, probably, but he'd long lost it on the curb, behind a fall and a half-empty bottle of vodka. Another light, and the copper's body is hauling him to his feet. The trainman only knows this because he's suddenly gotten taller, and the world is jerking and round in protest, and threatening to pull itself apart if he moves too fast. Reality is hobnailed together. He can see the cracks. The trainman is pretty sure he's lived in a few of them, but the coppers are blind. They don't see the cracks because they've convinced themselves that there aren't any. They don't see them because they've never fallen through. But the trainman has, and somewhere, deep in the back of his mind, he knows he's forgotten how to crawl back out. It's Monday evening when the trainman offers to kiss the tracks. That's not how he says it though. Manners are a memory in the trainman's mind. Something that had happened once and never had the time to stick. Something his mum used to smack him around the ear over, or his dad would bring the belt out for. The man he's yelling at is a suit, all sickly and pale in the face and choking on his tie. Around him, fellow commuters keep their eyes down and drown the world out with their headphones. Some, the trainman knows, are listening to him, either with the volume turned down or off completely. Vague interest, because none of them want the trainman to turn to them. Apathy is a wall that keeps the trainman at bay, like he's some kind of monster that lurks under beds. Don't look at him, they tell themselves, and he'll go away. The man with his lips pursed is stiff in the seat, white eyes darting around in desperation. The woman next to him is buried in her book, nose so deep that it's at risk of getting stuck. The trainman can see that her eyes aren't moving. She's waiting it out, riding through the trip like a dinghy in a storm. Sparks jump along the trainman's skin, and his arms prickle. Again, there's that hum, rippling through his senses and colouring the world in bright pastel pinks. The hum helps. If he uses enough, the hum gets so loud that the trainman can forget that his bare feet have been cut open by the gravel. Forget that there's a kid with his name that will never see his face and will never want to. The trainman can forget that he's the trainman and that had he done some things differently, then perhaps he wouldn't have to be. The suit mocks him, but this isn't the man. The suit itself pulls thin lips back into a sneer that hisses could haves, should haves, and never will. He can smell the money on the man, a real clear-cut stink that makes the trainman want to hurt him, want to curl his hairy hands around that fat neck and wring it like a towel. So he does.
Hi everyone, I'm Levitzke, and I'm going to read my story, Solomon's Maid. The bunting is flapping on a quiet breeze. It's a scalloped neckline skirting the trampoline. I watch from my sink, stained all around with orange dishwater. The yard is fringed with crepe myrtles and they're planted too close together. Novice gardeners do that. They get ahead of themselves. They want too much all at once. They plant their saplings like children tied together at the ankles. The trees are bare, solemn soldiers, desolate from this distance. I know that the new growth is there if you look up close. It's nearly spring and I noticed yesterday. I imagine the green buds must have made a tiny pop when they surfaced, an orgasm, a tear breaking from the duct. But I can't see the infinitesimal buds from here, just wiry prongs, rifles pointed towards the sky. They sent 2 women in tight navy pants with holsters. The first officer had stocky legs that were hard as her face, taut like her hairstyle, a tight knot, the crown shiny and slick with gel. She'd combed it that way, the way that left the impression of parallel lines like strings on a violin. I started counting the strokes, like sheep, like they might help me into oblivion, but I was soon writing his eulogy in my head. When they asked the questions, their faces were kind, nodding, teeth-tapping. They had watery eyes, so I knew they were mothers themselves. They'd forgiven me already. I was honest. I didn't lie. I didn't. It was my fault. And I said it over and over. My fault, my fault, my fault. And I alternated the intonation like a song, but it was all that I said, one confession strung like a pearl to the next. The baby's move was a fulcrum sending mine this way and that, but he's gone now, and there is nothing to look at but bunting flapping on a useless trampoline. We took cushions there, took them from the beds and the sofa to make a soft circle in the sunshine. The lavender and jasmine spun like spokes on a kid's bike, and the crepe myrtle was deep pink, a filigreed silhouette with the sun behind it. It was unusually windy and intermittent gusts, then still and serene as any other Australian summer's day. And I compared him to a summer's day, I know I did, because we were reading the Usborne children's poetry book and it was in there, Sonnet 18. And I ran to get my new digital camera because I had to keep the moment. My curly-haired boy rested inside a halo of cushions on the backyard trampoline. I stood on my tiptoes and took a bird's eye shot. I wished that I'd bought a wide-angle lens. One side of the circle was missing, so there he was, feigning sleep inside a waning moon of pillows. I danced around him, crouching low and shooting from all angles so that I might preserve the moment accurately. The glistening port wine magnolia in the background, the magenta display against the sky, and his cheeky face, his scrunched-up nose and Vegemite moustache. "What happened?" the one with the severe hair said, touching my knee as she spoke. He was heart-pounding, I can't breathe, heart-pierced, wet like seaweed. Yes, I loved him. It was a terrible love, terrible in the fear and the noise, the crying, the noise. I never knew the baby would make that kind of noise, a noise all knotted in my heart, a noise that made the air in my throat catch. His father, my husband, had a generous smile, generous because his mouth was too big for his face, his lips too long. His curls were the same. He wasn't a cruel man, Adam. No, he was customarily kind, so it was a shock to me when I realised that he loved the baby more than he loved me. He told me to get my shit together. He pulled out the vacuum and the window cleaner-like weapon. He made everything shiny and gleamy and began as if to say, "There, that was easy, and you're a failure." And he shook his head and scowled when he found me in the corner of the kitchen, locked away from the noise. "Where's Samuel?" he'd asked, and stalked away. "For Christ's sake, Mary," he'd muttered, opening the doors like dominoes to save the wretched child. And he'd returned with the red baby, soiled and muddied with tears, but already quiet beside his dad's heart. And I asked if he put the black mug on the shelf to upset me. My open kitchen shelves hold white mugs, white plates and crystalline champagne glasses, a sanctified display. And Adam plonked his black mug right there, right in the middle, like an affront. I squatted in the corner of the room against the nexus of cupboards, and he swore at me and left the house for his mother's. Of course, they committed me for some months after that. The baby came too, and I had absurd thoughts like, why would anyone commit a 3-month-old baby? There was an artist launching pictures into space, and in my craziest moments, I wished I could launch him, all curls, into the never-never. I told them that. Then, when I stopped voicing the crazy, they pushed me out with a capsule full of cries, and a handbag brimming with health department brochures. And Adam behaved like nothing had changed, though I'd been 2 months in an institution. The baby slept, and I ignored him as best I could until the medication began to do more than make me restless, until I could sleep again, enjoy the hours that the stern maternal health nurse had afforded me. And Samuel started to smile and suck on my chin, and I loved him more than I had loved any lover. I learnt what the other mothers knew. If I inhaled him, drank in his scent, then the weight of Samuel on my chest would make me as happy as I'd ever been. Domestic goddessing is a spectator sport, and I was winning. My name is Meredith, and I am a domestic goddess. I was a domestic goddess. I'd laced bunting around the trampoline, and together we'd sown seeds, and I'd recorded it all with my camera. I had the evidence, a mummy blob and Play-Doh warming in a saucepan. And Adam applauded me, as best a man doing a 12-hour day at the office can. His applause was a pat on the shoulder, sometimes a squeeze on the upper arm. In custody, I saw the headlines, and I wondered if the social worker had put the newspaper there on purpose, if it was a cruel tactic to make me talk, to make me fight. My last confession was beseeching. Please, it said, please arrest me. And then I had nothing, not a voice, nor the strength to stand.
Does anyone have any questions? I might actually ask Richard to maybe just say a little bit about the collection and the standard of entries, because I think the judges did have quite a difficult time making the selection from 256.
I didn't come with organised thoughts in my head, I'm afraid.
Unorganised.
Unorganised, yes, yeah. It's a sort of a generalisation, but the judges typically don't have a huge problem getting, in terms of making final decisions about winners and so forth. Out of 250 or so, you can get 40 or so. You can get 40 entries that are all very good. And then the problems start. They're technically good, they're engaging for whatever subjective reasons you find things engaging. And what I tend to do, and I'm just caught up in it at the moment, I'm just saying, I've got to stop doing this and spend more time on my own work, I think. But anyway, I'm just doing the Catherine Susanna Pritchard one at the moment. I've got them all sitting in a house 5 minutes away, and again, sort of thinking through this process of what you do. And so I end up with a heap of so many, say, and I put them aside for a while. Then I read the whole lot again, and I put them into 3 piles again. So I end up with, it's gone from a big mass to 3 piles. I forget the bottom 2 piles and start with the first pile. Put those into 3 piles. And then you end up with this, I don't know, maybe in the end 6 or 7 entries, and you think, now I really don't know what to do. This is terrible. I mean, sometimes you get lucky and something leaps out at you and think, this is fabulous, this is clearly what I think is the winner. But usually it's this 6 or 7. And at that stage, I tend to put them aside for a bit longer and have this, I think, perhaps slightly quirky approach, which is I don't look at them for a week or so. Then I think, what of these entries most stays in my mind? So it becomes a really quite subjective, I think, at that point, because really you could argue the toss about these 6 or 7 endlessly, and people would see it differently and so forth. So it sort of becomes what is most lodged there. And in a bigger sense, this is how this whole collection came together too, because we had a mass of stories to choose from that were all very good. And it's terrific to hear these read again and think just how good they are and how well they read. It's often not a bad test, I think, to read something aloud and see how it sounds as well. I know some stories are still better actually not read aloud. They're very dense and they're very convoluted and so forth, and you can't pick up on them so quickly. But these are all read extremely well and very interesting. As I was listening to them too, I thought, I hadn't sort of put this together, I thought actually these 3 stories are all about death.
Yeah.
What do we do? What are these people? What do they have in common here? And the other thing is that intrigues me listening to them is that because I know a little bit about the stories, one of the stories is drawn very directly from real experience, and the other 2 stories less so. It's not that they're not real and they don't exist, but they're not quite so. There isn't quite the same connection between author and narrative. And I wonder what it is about the writing that signals that. And it isn't just the first person, which leads you down that path a bit, thinking, oh, if it's first person, then it's obviously the writer is speaking about themselves, which is clearly very often not the case. But in this case, it is true of one of the stories. So, and I wonder whether there's something about the way those stories are written that tells you that. I don't know the answer. You should have asked me off the cuff. So I won't say any more. But I think they're wonderful.
Yeah, they are. So thank you all for coming. There's cheese there provided by Cullen. Thank Jean very much for that. And our next session is on the 3rd, I think, of November, Sunday, the first Sunday. And it's 2 novels. One is by Yvette Walker and the other one by Lynn Leonard. And Richard will be chairing that. It's in conversation with both the authors. And I would like you all to look out for this book and encourage your friends to buy it. But also just keep an eye out for our next collection, which gets launched at the Margaret River Readers and Writers Festival, which happens in May. So note that date in your diary. I think it's around the 17th of May. And I look forward to seeing all of you here again. Thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the 3 writers for coming. Vahri came from Busselton, and Kristen and Alyssa came from Perth.
Fantastic.